Us now on the Oakland County MegaCast. We want to bring in John McNamara. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association. John, thank you for being with us. I have to say, when that mandate came down from the health department requiring restaurants to now get the information from their customers, I immediately thought of you and some of these restaurant owners thinking, how in the world are they going to do this?
Yeah, Monday was surprisingly one of the busier days we've had this year. I don't think anyone was quite ready for how the public would receive this, and overwhelmingly it was not that well received in terms of having to give that information, what would happen to that information, where it would go. But luckily on Wednesday it became optional, and that became a lot easier for our members and for any restaurant or hospitality area in the state.
So we'll back up here for just a second for those that aren't familiar. Of course, the health department came out with the mandate that if you are eating or visiting your local restaurant, they are now required, or they were going to be required, to get your name, your phone number for possible contact tracing. But when that mandate came out, it's like they put it in writing, but it was lacking instruction and clarity as well. It makes you wonder, who is running the state of Michigan right now? Because this is public relations 101. That if you're going to put this stuff out, there are going to be questions, and you need to have those questions answered before you put this information out. So, as the vice president for the association, were you guys given a heads up that this was in the pipeline at all?
We were given about a 24-hour heads up that this was coming. We voiced our concerns with this process. We then, passed along some questions we knew would come up. And they said, they did take those questions very seriously. And they said, we'll have an FAQ doc out as soon as we can. But I think even before they could really have that FAQ doc out, they got feedback, mostly from their local health department, saying this simply won't work in terms of, the privacy information. They don't have the bandwidth to enforce it. And they tried to do this in the state of Oregon. Something similar happened, and the ACLU stepped in. In the state of Washington, the ACLU stepped in, and before it was even implemented, they walked it back in the state of Washington as well. So I think it's one of those things that sounds good on a piece of paper, and probably wouldn't hurt, but the ability to implement it and the ability to implement it easily and well just isn't there right now.
Right, and when you're doing this and you're not giving the business owners a chance to adapt and come up with a plan on how to do it, then there's no conformity and things get confusing. So I will say, I think most of the people in the public are very willing to take part and want to be a part of the solution to the COVID-19 crisis right now. But when it does come to your information and your privacy of information, and I know people say, well, we're really kind of giving that up every time we're out, or we use our phones, you get an app, you're putting your name and your phone number out there. Sure. You're being tracked anyway. Any feedback from some of the restaurants now that we're a few days into this? Are people pretty willing to give that information so far? Any issues?
No, there have been some issues, and what I would say to people have said it's no different than ordering a pizza. However, when you order a pizza, you're voluntarily making the choice to go there and order that pizza. If you walk into a restaurant, they're just different. If you don't have a reservation, so we did see some struggles Monday, but now that this is no longer a required practice, it's just a strongly recommended practice. We're seeing most restaurants. They'll offer it. They'll say, if you'd like to leave your information, you don't have to. But the vast majority of people are choosing not to. And, if an outbreak were to happen, over 90% of transactions at restaurants are done with a credit or debit card. So if they really had to find who was there at certain times, there's a way to do it.
Yeah, and I have to say, I've been on the state's website. So for people that don't know, the state does post their clusters and their outbreaks by a setting. It's updated on Mondays, I believe, just like the information for the schools is updated as well. When it comes to bars and restaurants across the state of Michigan, the numbers actually, and to me, are surprisingly low. So where is this coming out of?
So It's been a misnomer since all this started that bars and restaurants were a super spreader, or that's where outbreaks occur. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that they're low at restaurants, because before this happened, restaurants didn't want to see anyone get sick in their establishments or in general. So they've been following the rules, and people have to wonder: would you rather have people in a restaurant where they're going to make you wear your mask until you sit down? They're going to make sure, unless you're sitting down, you're 6 feet apart, and they're going to enforce the rules that are in place? Or would you rather have people gathering in someone's basement where there are no capacities, no one's going to wear a mask, and obviously it's just a little more loose? So, my argument is, restaurants are going to be far safer than your friend's basement right now with a bunch of your friends.
And just so to put the numbers in perspective, as of October 29th, according to the state of Michigan, outbreaks associated with a bar and employee associated, there were only 2 in the entire state, none here in the Oakland County area. 2 for employee and patron associated, again, 2 statewide, none here in the Oakland County area. When it comes to restaurants, employees associated, 11 through the entire state, 3 here in Oakland County, but compared to nursing facilities, which have 42, schools have 44.
Yep.
So I guess I will say, when I started looking at the outbreak numbers myself, I thought it was going to be much higher than what it is. So is that, number one, it's just not maybe getting reported if there are cases, or is this pretty accurate about where we stand right now, because bars and restaurants have been taking so many protocols?
No, this is accurate from where we stand right now, and it's because our members and even non-member restaurants across the state immediately stepped up, adapted their business model in order to serve the public. Because for some people, going out to eat is an event or is a treat, but for some people, restaurants are their food source. 51% of the meals in this country are provided by a restaurant. Some people don't have access to grocery stores or the ability to cook if they do. So it's just always important to remember that while restaurants are fun and they're great, and I love, going out and checking out new restaurants, in some places they truly are a public service.
Yeah, so there were some questions that I had. Maybe you can help clarify, because I read the order when it first came out, and it said, specifically mention for patrons ordering food. So if you were ordering food, then that's where you had to take your name and number, but it didn't mention specifically for people that were possibly just ordering a drink. Has that been clarified?
So it has been. So it was really, if you're going in to get takeout, you're fine. But essentially, if you're going to go in and sit down, even if it was a cup of coffee, we had a member reach out who, they have sort of a grocery store that has a little coffee. They're mostly a grocery, but they have a little coffee area with 3 or 4 tables where someone might sit down for 15, 20 minutes. And they called and said, do we really have to take their name? And, they did on Monday and Tuesday. And then Wednesday rolled around and it became suggested but not required. So then they did. But it was, if you're meeting your friends for happy hour, you still need to sit, give your name.
John McNamara with us here on the Oakland County MegaCast. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association. And talking about the clarification, so now it's recommended, but if there is an outbreak and the restaurants, so is it recommended that they collect it, or are they still required to ask for the information?
It's recommended that they collect it. It is no longer required.
Okay, but do they still have to ask for it?
No.
No, not at all. Okay, so there's some clarification there. So if you want to do your part, you're open to them having your information, because
Yep.
I think one of the big concerns also had to do is, while we like to think that all of the employees that work in, the thousands of restaurants and establishments throughout the state of Michigan are honest, ethical people, we do know that sometimes this information can
Sure.
get out. It's no different than, we've seen with credit cards. There have been credit card
Yep.
scams with employees that have been able to get your credit card. One of the things I like, and they've been doing it in Europe for decades, is they actually bring the machine to your table and run your card right there in front of you and give it back. So you never have to actually give your
Right.
card over. So knowing that, I would think as a business owner, even trying to, even now, if I collect that information, is it what happens if it is shared and that information gets out?
Well, that was a major concern of our members of if something, because things happen, and we've seen plenty of people who have a QR code that goes to a Google form, but if that information is compromised, who is liable for it? The last thing our members or any business in general wants to do right now is expose themselves to any more cost or any more liability than they already are. It's we've already lost about 2,000 restaurants in the state of Michigan. We think we could lose 2,000-ish more by through this winter and through the end of the year. So if you're looking at 4,000 to 5,000 restaurants closing permanently and 1,000 hotels closing, that's a one massive job loss, but also just a massive loss to our economy and to tourism in general.
John, the recommendation from the state is to ask for that information, collect that information, and send it in. But as you said, most customers are opting not to provide that information. From the restaurant's perspective, in terms of maintaining a clean environment and preventing any sort of an outbreak, or being able to report that properly should there be a potential of an outbreak in the facility from an employee that may test positive, or from a customer that reports back and says, hey, I tested positive, I was recently in your restaurant. What is your organization recommending to its member businesses to prepare for that situation, given the fact that most customers are opting not to provide information to the state per this recommendation?
So, we're just recommending that they follow their customers' lead. And, what we're seeing most of our members do is, next to the QR code that has the menu for food and drinks, have a QR code with the form where if they want to, they can enter their name. And if they don't, they don't. But additionally, we've had members who have outbreaks before. And again, with 90% being credit card transactions, if they believe they needed to, I'd be a little more work, but they could find that information. But also, to be considered exposed to, even if an employee had an outbreak, it's close contact for 15 minutes. So, I don't know of a lot of situations where you're talking to your server for 15 minutes in the time frame when you're in a restaurant. And obviously, the other people you're sitting at the table with. So if one of them tests positive, they can let the other people at the table know.
So I'm thinking, if you're talking to your server for a full 15 minutes,
yeah,
that's really slowing down a service, or you
right.
definitely want a very specific order.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be so popular of
right.
a customer.
Yeah.
So this mandate, these recommendations aside, we're going into the winter months. We've had incredible weather, other than last Sunday when it snowed. Of course, only in Michigan can it snow on one Sunday and be 65 on
70,
the next week. So knowing that, I know a lot of the restaurants are still struggling with trying to get clarification on their expanded areas and their tents going into the winter months. And that is if they can even get a tent, because supplies are hard to get right now. So how are things looking for some of the restaurants in the winter months?
In general, it's a scary time for us as an association and for the industry as a whole. Because as you mentioned, we're still working on getting clarification of exactly, what can be done. But even if someone wanted to get a tent, they're very hard to come by right now. So, we're starting to have discussions on things like maybe some sort of, a tax break for takeout, or a tax break on takeout containers, or really getting creative to incentivize people to continue to utilize takeout during this time. And obviously, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the governor's office has encouraged people not to go inside to a restaurant, which is, unfortunate. However, we believe that, takeout is really going to be what helps people get to spring. Hopefully by spring, this starts to be in the rearview mirror and we have a reliable vaccine. So, it's going to be tough. It's going to be scary. We're definitely going to see some long-time multi-generational businesses probably have to close their doors. But also encouraged by the conversations we've had with the administration on, encouraging takeout and encouraging to help this industry. And then hopefully by, Thanksgiving or early December, the federal government will be back in Washington, D.C., and we'll see another round of paycheck protection funding and maybe another round of stimulus checks, which will dramatically help as well.
Yeah, how is the employee situation looking for a lot of these owners? Still struggling?
So it's still struggling, and it's tough. They have plenty of people who want to work, but they don't necessarily have enough hours for these people to work. And for some people, it still makes more sense, not to go to work because unemployment's just better. And you are seeing the people who luckily for the most part are over tipping and being generous, which is great. And we thank everyone who's done that, and we hope they encourage to do that. But when you can only have 50 people inside a 6,000 square foot restaurant, it's tough to have even half of your team there, to serve 50 people. That could be only 4 or 5 tables. So at that point, you're going to have probably two servers, someone behind the bar, and then a very limited kitchen staff. But obviously, if it could be full, you're going to have a lot more people. But there's a 50-person cap right now inside.
Yeah, and on top of that, they just also put the new restrictions back in place for some of the bigger venue events, like for people having weddings. So these banquet halls, they still have to pay their taxes, I'm sure. They still have to keep the lights on. And without a vaccine, you just wonder how many people are going to say enough already. I'm leaving this industry and I'm going to shift focus into another area.
Yeah, so we're worried about that, but also, we had a member who had to call 2 brides who were supposed to have a 140 and 160 person wedding last weekend, and have to call them on Thursday and say, "I'm really sorry. I hate to make this call, but you're either going to have to skim down your guest list, you're going to have to postpone your wedding because all of a sudden now I can only have 50 people inside my very large banquet facility."
Oh my goodness gracious. I would not want to be the person making that phone call.
Nope.
And let's hope that they weren't a bridezilla about that, because again, it just puts some of these business owners in such a hard spot. I'm just imagining that conversation when I plan my wedding. I mean, you're so tense, it's never an easy thing to go through. And then to have that call the week of your wedding, oh no.
Well, not the week, the day before in one case.
Oh, my goodness.
And then only 48 hours before the other one.
Oh, yeah, I guess it's really, sorry you don't make the list. Can you just imagine them showing up and turning them away?
Right. Or having to make some really awkward phone calls the night before the wedding.
Well, we'll just, we appreciate your time. Quickly before we let you go, though, I know in the beginning when the mask rules were coming out, there were a lot of issues with people fighting with, the employees about having to put their mask on, not having to put their mask on. So now with, restaurants also trying to collect information, for the most part, are people in the public being pretty gracious and nice about this? Because we're 7 months into this. We're used to it. With
masks now, it's a generally accepted practice. There was a slight period when the Supreme Court struck down the governor's ability to issue orders beyond 30 days, where people thought it was, sort of this free-for-all. But then Department of Health and Human Services put it back out, and people are just used to it with masks. We're really not seeing that be a problem anymore. We had 1 or 2 incidents where, unfortunately, people took the information thing very seriously and very personally when they were asked. But luckily, that was just a sort of blip on the radar, and it's, they're continuing to move forward, but move forward with extreme caution and extreme worry about, what's going to happen here when this 70-degree weather eventually goes away, because unfortunately, it will. If it stayed all winter, that'd be fine with me, but it's not going to, so.
Well, we wish them the best of luck. They have a long road ahead of them. And John, thank you again, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association. I know that you and your team do not have an easy job up there, and I can only imagine when this health department mandate came out, how crazy your phone must have been ringing off of the hook. So thank you again for all that you do.